Why don't you go ahead and mute, Lisa?
All right, Rob, you should have access.
I do.
We have 6 attendees in the waiting room, it looks like.
And Christy, we can start as soon, I mean, I'd like to start at 7:30 right on time if we can.
Okay, I will hit record and you can start the meeting. Go ahead, Wade.
Okay, great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is the Village of Chagrin Falls Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for September. It's Tuesday, September 15. We had moved our meeting earlier than it normally would be. So this is the regular September meeting of the BZA. My name is Wade Frick. I am the chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Thank you all for being here. We've had a number of virtual sessions and they all seem to work out quite well. Special thanks to Christy Holmes for helping us with all the technology. We have a short agenda tonight. There is only one application before us. And before we get into that, for those who are listening or are joining this call perhaps for the first time, what will happen is we will hear I'll ask Rob Jamison, the village administrator, to give us the background on the application that's before us. And then from there, we'll turn it over to the applicant to make a presentation. The board will ask questions throughout the presentation. And then we'll turn it back to Christy, who will open the lines. And we typically, I like to do people who would like to speak on behalf of the application, excuse me, to speak, make comments, direct their comments to us as opposed to the applicant is the way I typically like to see it done. And then we'll open it up to anyone who would like to speak in opposition to the application with the same proviso. If you could address your comments to the board, and if there are questions we can ask of the applicant, we'll do so. But the main thing is, everybody, thank you for all being here, and you all will be heard. There'll be an opportunity for everybody to be heard. We want to make sure we have a full, complete record. So all that being said, again, there's only one item on the agenda. I turn it over to Mr. Law Director. Dale, would you like to swear witnesses in before we proceed further?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is, as each one starts to speak, I would swear them in once they're opened up by Christy to speak, rather than do it in mass.
Okay.
So I'm not sure who's going first. I know that Jordan Burns is here on behalf of the applicant, and let's see who else.
I will start with Jordan, and if there are any other attendees who want to be promoted to a panelist to join the discussion, please use the raise your hand function in the Zoom platform. I will start with Jordan.
Mike Scaletta would also speak, and Alexandra Yankov would also.
Yes, I will promote them all to panelists.
Thank you. So I'll start with Jordan Burns, and Jordan normally isn't testifying, so he would not need to be sworn in, but if he was planning on testifying, he can let me know and I'll swear him in. If not, then if Michael or Alexandra speak, I'll ask each of them to be sworn.
Okay, and as a reminder to everyone who's participating, we do take a written record of this. So please, if you speak, if you could identify who is speaking. It's sometimes hard to transcribe. We don't know when we're not doing this live. So, but we will create the normal written minutes. So if everyone could be clear on who they are and make that statement before they speak, I'd appreciate it. So I guess we'll proceed then. I will announce the only matter before us is the application of the Brick House Partners, 180 Cleveland Street. Rob, let's turn it over to you. There's a fairly lengthy background, but please, take your time and help us understand kind of where we are today on this one.
Sure. Thank you, Wade. This is the Brick House Townhouse development proposed at 180 Cleveland Street, permanent parcel number 931-17003. This is in the RMU zoning district. This project has come before the Board of Zoning Appeals several times in the past, most recently last month for a lot coverage variance and balcony projection variances that were granted by the board and upheld. after the 15-day appeal period. So the matter before us tonight is two concepts for a total of 3 variances. The first is the retaining wall on the south border of the property. As further details came in about the retaining wall, we analyzed that wall in light of Code Section 114807, which was put in place in 2019, and found that there were several nonconformities that needed to be addressed. The first variance is 114807C, retaining walls. The code requires that retaining walls must be set back from a property line a minimum of 3 foot, plus 1 additional foot for each foot of wall height greater than the 3-foot distance. Based on the information submitted to us, and that I'll show on the screen here shortly, the proposed wall starting at the east end going west, the first 125 feet of the wall is between 1.4 to 6 feet in height, located on the property line up to 2.5 feet from the property line. So a variance of between 1 to 6 feet is required depending on what section of the wall you're talking about. The wall, it varies in height as you go down. The profile of the wall, depending on the topography of the land, both below the wall and above it. And this standard covers the entire length, so it does vary as it goes along. The next 2 variances are new to the Board of Zoning Appeals. These are to the Chagrin Falls Building Code, Section 13 of our code. In the past, the building code only had several sections that granted an appeal authority to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And when we performed the code review on this overall project, we found 2 sections pertaining to setback from a lot line in the building code that were not in conformance. And we didn't have a relief method in place when we looked at that. So first we had to create a system of who was going to address these nonconformities. And through discussions, it was proposed that it be granted to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Legislation was proposed to council. It was discussed and it was passed last night at council. Ordinance, let's see here. Ordinance 2020-38 that grants the authority to the Board of Zoning Appeals to hear variance requests to the local building code. The 2 matters that do involve the building code, the first one is section 1339.01, structure within 3 foot of a lot line. The code requires that no structure shall be closer than 3 foot to any lot line. All 5 buildings, a total of 6 units in the proposed development, are within the 3 foot of the property line, and all 6 units have balconies that project over the rear property line between 8 and 9 feet. So a variance of 11 to 12 feet, depending on which unit you're talking about, would be required. The second item is building code 1339.02, projection near a lot line. This states that no portion of a building can be built within or protrude closer than 3 foot to any lot line. All 5 buildings, again, are within 3 foot of a property line, and all 6 units have the protruding balconies of between 8 and 9 feet. The same variance of 11 to 12 feet would be required. Both of these code sections are very closely related. Both of them are also very closely related to the lot line setback variances in the zoning code that were considered by the Board of Zoning Appeals last month. However, these are found in the building code and are to be looked at as from a building code perspective. Instruction was sent out today on the standards to be met for a building code variance, which are found in an area variance like this, that it's the same standards used for a zoning area variance. So those are the matters before us tonight. And if you have any questions, I can answer those before we move on.
I don't think so. Any questions of the board of Rob? Thank you for all that. Questions for Rob before we dive into this?
Yeah, I have one quick question. You said the standards for granting the variance are the same as are the Duncan factors, our normal
Yeah.
reasoning? Okay.
Not when it comes to the building code. They're pretty close, but they're a little different.
Who spoke? Who just said that?
That was Andrew Rocky.
When it comes to area variances, it says use the same standard. but
I
when-
thought it's referred specifically to 1107C, which is the Duncan factors.
Right, it's 111107C from section 3, paragraph 1 of ordinance 2020-38.
Okay,
There is different standards in the cases of a building material variance request or for a variance appealing a decision of the village administration or village official.
okay.
So just to be clear, we're talking about the Duncan factors. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. All right. All that being said, I'll turn it over then to Brickhouse Partners. Who will be speaking first, and then Dale can swear that person in.
This is Jordan Burns. I'll start off.
Dale, do you need to swear Jordan in?
Only if he plans to testify, which I doubt.
Yeah, I do not plan to testify, but I'm happy to introduce the other participants from Brickhouse and talk a little bit about the standards that are applicable here.
Okay.
Thank you. A couple of other thank yous. Thank you for moving your meeting up. We really do appreciate that. Thank you also for your continued attention to this project. We know that it is unusual to appear before you a number of times like we are. So we appreciate your attention and your patience, or at least your appearance of patience, as we work through the building and zoning code as it applies to this unique project. As Rob explained, there are two sets of variances that we're here tonight seeking. One was referenced in our meeting last month, and it's the variance that applies to the retaining wall. And Rob did a very fine job of explaining the need for that variance. As Alex and Mike, who you both of whom you know from prior meetings, will explain and answer any questions on, this is a retaining wall that's essential to the project. It retains the driveway and parking area for the project. Its location has remained largely, if not entirely, unchanged from the inception of this project. And I think that's important because you've seen a number of iterations of the site plan for this project. The Planning Commission has seen a number of iterations. The Architectural Review Board has seen a number of iterations of this project. And in all of those, a retaining wall, similar, if not identical in location to the one before you tonight, has been a critical feature of the development. So you will hear tonight about its importance to the project, why it's necessary to locate it, where it's located on the project site, and the reasons under the Duncan standards for the variance to be granted there. The other set of variances, the two related ones that Rob mentioned, are under the building code, but as Rob noted, they're closely related to the area variances that you granted last month, and they're to be considered using the same standards as you considered and ultimately granted those variances last month. And for the same reasons as set out at the last BZA meeting, the variances should be granted here. These are variances that are necessary because of the configuration of the sublots, essentially to follow the building envelopes as the Planning Commission requested. Prior to that request from the Planning Commission, the buildings sat on sublots that were largely, if not entirely compliant, certainly met these provisions of the building code. But at the Planning Commission's request, the configuration of the individual sublots were changed so that they follow the building envelope, and so that the area beyond the buildings would be common area under the control of the homeowners association.
Hey, Jordan,
Among-
excuse me for a second. I'm really sorry to interrupt. This is
Sure
Wade.
thing.
Rob, could you put up the picture of the property? I think it would be more helpful, and perhaps the speakers could, as opposed to looking at all the verbiage we had in the actual, yeah, there you go. At least, and Jordan, I don't know if that helps you at all or not in presenting, but I'm a visual person when it comes to some of this stuff, so it may
No.
help us as well.
No, thank you. Appreciate it. So yeah, as you can see there, the buildings conform to the boundaries of the sublots. And the consequence of that, as noted in Rob's write-up, is that essentially the building setback requirements that are contained in the building code are not met. They are not met because the sublots were reconfigured, the consequence of which is that the decks project beyond the boundary of the sublot at the rear of the lots, and the buildings are right along the boundaries of the sublots elsewhere. Again, by necessity of the configuration at the request of the Planning Commission. So just like the setback requirements under the zoning code required variances at your last meeting, we're now here seeking variances from the building code provisions that really dictate the same kinds of setbacks. So that's why we're here. Those, to be candid, weren't on our radar, and perhaps were not on the village's radar when we were before the BZA at our last meeting. I don't think that those were mentioned as part of the reason that we were going to be back here. But your administrative officials are doing a very thorough job here, as they should be, and identifying all of the variances that are necessary here. That requires us to seek those variances as well, but again, for the same reasons as prior variances were granted, these should be granted. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Alex to talk a little bit more about both the retaining wall, which now that we've got the site plan up, is at the south edge of the property, and as well as the setback or projection variances that are required. Thanks.
And also, I wanted to let all the Brickhouse people know, I do have all the documents that you submitted to me ready to screen share. So if you need anything particular brought up, let me know and I'll bring it up on the screen.
Okay.
Hey,
Alex,
I'm
let me-
sorry. I noticed that there was a question about whether we can see Mr. Miller, and the answer is yes. I see Mr. Miller on here and I see him muted. So I don't know if that helps. Ms. Smith was asking that. And I don't know, Christy, if there's anything more we need to do there. I noted that as an open Q&A.
He
I
can go to
noticed-
the chat box and raise his hand when he wants to speak.
Yes.
Or he can go to the participant, or he can go to the Q&A and say he'd like to speak. There's three ways actually for him to get our attention.
But we're not to that point of the proceeding yet. So I
That's-
assume Mr. Miller is not part of the Brickhouse group.
That's correct.
So believe me, Mr. Miller and Ms. Smith, you'll have every opportunity to speak down the road. So yes, you're here. We see you and we'll hear you later.
And I'll swear in Alexandra Yankov, if you'd raise your right hand for me, please. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you'll give to the Board of Zoning Appeals will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, yes.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Again, I want to second Jordan and thank you for meeting us and meeting us earlier as well than your regular meetings. That's very important to us. So a little bit of a background about the project. We started, as you all know, in 2017, and this was, I think, the first time when we started submitting. And the access to the townhomes with the retaining wall were always somewhat similar to what you see right now. And we were altering the homes during these years. And last year, we have submitted this site plan around April with this type of retaining wall and with the section that is on the property line. And then the ordinance that we are talking about was passed in August, I think, of 2019. So we weren't advised that there is a change there, and we have purchased the property in September of last year, knowing that we can have that access. We need the retaining wall in order to accommodate the residence number 6. That is the, what is it, east, the further one. Without this access and the retaining wall being on the property line here, we wouldn't be able to access that residence. And when we have designed the site plan, and I'm sorry, just a little bit noise, I'm at the office. Well, when we have submitted that, this ordinance hadn't been changed in August. So we prepared the site plan earlier that year, and then we continued with our due diligence period. And we have continued with our design development drawings and construction documents with this site plan. We were advised that we need to meet with you and ask for a variance in August of this year, when we have the construction documents already done and prepared. And this is a little bit of the background. I can address a little bit the retaining wall itself. So there is a section, as Rob mentioned, about 125 feet that is on the property line, with a little bit of a section that is actually between 0 and 2.5 feet from the property line.
At this point, excuse me, Rob, can you drag the hand that you have there and show us exactly what we're talking about here? Is it that dark black line?
The dark black line, yeah.
On the right-hand side? Oh, you're gonna draw or circle? Yeah, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, and as that appears, most of it is right on the lot line, is that correct?
Most of it is on the lot line, except the small section further down that's between 0 and 2.5 feet
Right,
of the property line.
Thank you.
In that area, the wall height, it's at the highest point is 6 feet. At the lowest, it goes to 3.3. It's the latest mark, and there is another plan, that's the grading plan, Rob, and all of the heights are shown there.
Give me a second, please.
Mhm.
Let me figure out how to give me 1 second. And I have to remove my annotation, so give me a second on that, please.
Can I ask a quick question while you're doing that? We're talking about an ordinance change in August of 19.
I think so. Dale maybe and Rob can confirm that.
Yes, in August of 2019, we passed ordinance 2019-39, which was the comprehensive rezoning that changed, virtually every section of the code.
So if this had been submitted prior to, if there had not been a change?
The retaining wall section was entirely new. There were provisions for walls, but not specifically for retaining walls before last year's adoption.
Okay. Thank you.
And the retaining wall is required by the village? I mean, it's required by code. Is that by the 2019 amendments?
Yes.
And what is it about this project that requires a I mean, if they had just built a single house, would they have to have a retaining wall there?
It
Uh,
would depend on
It
the
would be,
topography.
it would be the same either way. It wouldn't matter.
Okay.
Retaining walls, not based on what else is constructed around it.
I guess why wasn't this retaining wall brought up for variance before? That's the timing issue that we're concerned about. Like, this is code that was, it's not like it was August of 2020. So why hasn't this variance been brought to this with all the other variances along the way? Did something change in the retaining wall or something just went into place with the code? I think that's where we're confused.
It was a combination of both when it was noted by our review, as well as when additional information was submitted on the project. So it was partially on the village's, note that when we noticed that there was a nonconformity to the wall as the project developed, and we brought it forth as soon as we unveiled that information.
I'm not sure that answered my question, Rob. I'm sorry. We've had many variance meetings in the last year about this project. Why was this variance for the retaining wall not brought it to light until now?
Because it wasn't identified until just recently that there was a nonconformity.
Oh,
So
but the retaining wall has always been there.
there's
Yes.
always been a retaining wall proposed with this project since very early on. I believe its spacing from the property line has changed over the last several years that this project has been part of the review. As far as it being positioned where it is last year, at some point it did move closer to the property line. We didn't note the change with the addition of the code section that came in play last August. And then as we were doing more recent reviews, the retaining wall was noted, and then it was reanalyzed, and that's when the nonconformity was discovered.
So are you saying that there was a time when it was not, when it was, would have complied with the code and then it was moved?
I can't say that because originally there was a different code section in mind that was in play with that. And the plan was not at that stage of the review when we first looked at it. So it's a combination of several factors here that ended up why we're here now. Part of it was when the village caught or noticed the location of the wall and knew that it had to be analyzed, or that realized that it had to go through further scrutiny. And that's when the nonconformities were found.
And the retaining wall is required by code because there's a slope issue, or what's
There
the,
is slope. Mhm.
that's the reason for the retaining
For
wall
the retaining
requirement?
wall, yeah.
Topographical condition.
Yeah. So the retaining wall has always been there on that side of the property from the inception of the project. If it has changed a little bit in configuration of it, it was mainly on the lower part. In my opinion, it has been always close or on the property line on the upper part, because that's where the site is more narrow and we don't have a lot of space there. So in that sense, the indication on the site plans for a retaining wall was always there. Then as the project evolved, it was further detailed, and throughout the construction document phase and ARB process, it was just further detailed until even now when we are facing building permits and starting construction, which is a normal process. I mean, we would detail it if we are still in entitlement process.
So this is, I have a question. Do we know when the retaining wall showed up on a plan submitted, or was it before or after the zoning?
There was always a retaining wall as part of
It's
the.
always, so when were the original set of plans submitted for this? Was that before or after the zoning recall?
It was
Overhaul?
before. It was before the zoning code changed.
Okay.
Now, at first, we just had site plans, so we didn't have a lot of detailed information about the wall. As we moved forward in the development, additional information was submitted on the wall, and that triggered a more close review, and that's where we discovered the height issues that were at play.
Hey, Rob, on this diagram, what's the row just to the south of the retaining wall with all the little half circles. What does that represent?
And Alexandra, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that's the area of disruption. Is that correct?
Your hand-
Or no, what is that? Let me get up to that. I'm sorry. I don't want to misspeak.
Can you put, can you put the little hand on that, what I'm talking
Yeah.
about?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're right. It's,
squiggly
yeah, the half circles.
Right.
Yeah, that's the area that we'll need access to construct. And Mike Scaletta, are you here? Or is he in the meeting to maybe let us know about
Yes,
this?
I'm here.
Okay. Is that right, Mike?
Mike, I got to swear you in.
He's gonna be sworn in.
Please do.
Okay. You want to raise your right hand for me, please? Okay. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you'll give to the Board of Zoning Appeals will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
So those half circles are basically the area disturbance. So kind of our clearing limits.
So you'll be disturbing someone else's property to build this?
Well, I think that's more for Alex to answer. But the game plan is, to construct that concrete wall, we will need some area in the neighboring property. And Alex, I know has been.
So, yeah, we will need some access on that section of 120 feet. We'll need access to build the wall. And Joe Miller is here as well. He's the neighbor, and he can talk about this. We reached out to them 2 days ago to confirm if that would be okay for them. It's so if you want, and we had their confirmation.
So you're saying that there is no way to build this wall, even granted a variance, without disturbing somebody else's property, without digging into their property to build it, correct?
From constructability point of view, there is always a way in construction. It's going to be faster. It's going to be more convenient to have access to that site as well.
From the project standpoint, is the retaining wall something that, you obviously have to do it because the village told you needed to do it, but I assume it has value to you as well with respect to erosion on your project. Is that correct? Or what's the meaning of a retaining wall as far as you're concerned from the project standpoint?
Well, it's the grading. I mean, the grading on the Miller's property, it's much higher. So you see the retaining wall there at the end. It's about 6 feet, and then it's in the middle is 3.5. So that's really why the retaining wall is needed, because that's our driveway road. Access to the properties, and we have much lower elevation on the other side of the retaining wall.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
that's
Mr.
our
Miller's
road
raising his
there.
hand. We will get to you after the presentation, sir, if that's okay. You probably have things you want to just make note
Yeah,
of what you want to say, but I'd like to continue with the developer first if we can.
That's
Okay.
So
fine.
I'm sorry, Alex, we keep interrupting you, asking questions, but
It's okay. That way
And
I
Mike.
warm up better
sure.
with the presentation.
Is our retaining wall measured from the front? The setback requirement to the front of the retaining wall or to the back of the retaining wall?
To the back of the retaining wall.
Okay.
You mean to the back, to the neighbor, right?
Right, so you have
yeah.
to be, in some points, you're gonna have to be 6 feet. You should have to be 6 feet away from the property line, and in some points you have to be 4, but is that measured to the front of the retaining wall or to the back of the retaining wall is my question?
The back.
The back.
The first point at which you start at the property line at the very first part of the wall that you contact.
Okay. And does that doesn't include any drainage, French drain, or anything that's put behind the wall?
Is there any drainage behind the wall? I think
Yeah, I mean, is there gonna be a French drain or anything that's behind the wall?
Yes.
And
Yeah,
now is that,
So
It'll run the
essentially,
whole length of the wall and out into the storm sewer.
so
then-
that will be on the property that you don't own?
Nothing would be on the property
Yeah.
that we don't own. Everything is within our property.
But if the retaining wall is on the property line and you need to put the drainage on that side of the retaining wall, how are you fitting that in?
Mike, do you have this detail?
I mean, that's likely why the code says not to build a retaining wall on the property line. So you can, one, build it without disturbing somebody else's property.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be built without disturbing. It's just definitely a more convenient way to be able to do it, to gain access to the Miller's property. It's a nice thing that they're allowing us to do. It does help the ease and safety of building that wall. There will be a French drain in the back there. It's not shown in that wall detail, but there will be a drain back there. And
It is shown in that detail. It's right down there in the bottom corner. It says drain as specified by engineer.
yeah, so on the left-hand side, it's called a ready rock wall. So that's not the wall along the property line. If you scroll up, you see the blocks beyond that property. That's where that details at is considered it's a ready rock wall. And that's what that'll be. The other wall is the concrete section that we're discussing. And that where that thick black line is. So if we, need to move it off the property line a little bit more than it is, then, to get that 4-inch drain in there, then we'll need to. I know it's not directly on, I don't believe. It's hard to see right here. I think there's a couple inches, 2-3 inches in off that property line. Yeah. So we might need to move it in 2 more inches or 3 more inches.
At the risk of asking the obvious, I assume you cannot move the wall closer to your properties because it would block a driveway. I mean, what have you done to take every inch from your own property in the analysis?
Yeah, I mean, that will prevent the access to the last residence, which is the most prominent residence on this project.
I mean, we could move it closer to the river, but we were constricted by planning commission in doing so. So if you scroll up, I'm not sure if it's shown on this.
It's
print.
not on this one, maybe on the grading plan or the utility.
They
one of the two.
restricted us from building, within 5 foot of that bank. So,
Of the crest of the slope.
Yep, the crest of the slope. So we could move that forward, but they limited us that distance. So that's where this constraint's coming in a little bit more.
I mean, it seems like you could shrink the size of the building 6 feet.
Well, it's not gonna be marketable. Can we physically do it? Yeah, but could we find a client for it? It's hard to say because these are first floor masters and that's the square footage that's looked at.
I don't want to tease Mr. Miller with questions I'm sure he's dying to get in on, but have you talked with them about an easement on his property to move this further away?
Yes, I have. Did you hear me?
That was unsuccessful?
Well, we just haven't, they came back to me and said they wanted to do this proposal first.
And I'm sorry, who's speaking?
Joe Miller.
And he needs to be sworn in.
Let me swear him in. Mr. Miller, can you raise your right hand for me? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you'll give to the Board of Zoning Appeals will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm Joe Miller. I live at 170 Cleveland Street, the property adjacent to this project. I've had many, many discussions with Andrew Brickman about this project over the last couple of years and would like to see it be successful. it wasn't until just recently that the location of this end of the retaining wall came, or at least I became aware of the details of it. If you haven't seen the slope of the land, this is a very steep slope. And so this retaining wall is critical to keeping the land from slipping down towards the river. As I understand it, the retaining wall is being proposed to be placed, and I'm talking about the eastern portion, which is the heavy dark line, is to be placed 6 inches from the property line, which would require disturbing our property in order to get it in place, to get it constructed. And I would guess that future maintenance would also require disruption to our property just to maintain the wall. So it seems to me the most logical solution to this is a permanent easement in this area so that the Brick House partners would have access to build it and would have access to maintain it in the future. And I have had very preliminary discussions with Andrew Brickman about that. We haven't really come to any conclusion in terms of pricing and the overall details of the easement. But to me, that makes the most sense to make this project, or to enable this wall to be built and maintained.
Well, thank you for that. And we took you out of order because I think it makes sense today. So thank you. And you're not foreclosed from speaking further. But I assume that in a perfect world, if from a zoning perspective, if an easement was granted, there would potentially not be a variance. And this is for Dale, I guess. I mean, if the Brick House project retaining wall was built 5 feet over the line into Mr. Miller's property, just picking a number, there would not be a need for a variance, I would assume.
No, we would still need the variance because the retaining wall it has to be so many feet from the property line. The fact that they would grant a variance would certainly ameliorate the factors, but they would still be required. Just like if you were going to build a house over the property line and you got an easement, you'd have to get a variance.
Okay. All right, so we've jumped around just to get a full record here, but I'm sorry, back to Brick House. Alex, we sort of interrupted you, or I did. I don't know, did you have more that you wanted to talk about? And I think we started to get some testimony in there from someone else, from Mike perhaps. I don't want to disrupt the flow of your presentation. So if you have more that you wanted to say, please carry on, and then we'll circle back with questions.
A lot of the information that I was about to provide was already discussed through questions. Maybe we can just address, Rob, if you can go to the retaining wall so that we can talk about the 2 sections of this wall. So the section that you see a little bit wider, that's further, it's lower wall, and it's further from 3 feet from the property line. And that type of wall, it's going to be, the manufacturer is Ready Rock, but these are like stones. That's how it looks like. That's a section, a typical detail. And there is another one that could show you how it's going to look like. And it's an attempt to mimic the stone of the bridge that's nearby. And on the concrete portion of the wall that goes closer to the property line, that is designed to be the concrete wall. So it's got at this point where the wall becomes closer to the property line, it's going to turn into a concrete wall, so it's thinner. And we're going to use the similar veneer of the concrete wall to continuously have the same look on the inner side of our homes. And there is, I think, a 3D rendering as well that could give you a little bit better idea how the access to the property looks like. It's a JPEG image, it's not a PDF.
Yeah,
If
give
you
me
have it.
1 second to figure out how to screen share that. Hold on a second.
I have it. I can share my screen.
Can anybody
Okay.
see that?
Not
Rob,
yet.
in order to share a new screen, you have to stop the current screen share and
Okay.
start a new one.
There we go.
Yeah.
How's
So,
that?
so that is and that's a computer generated model. It's not the picture of, but this is what is the intent, the design intent of the Ready Rock, and then continuously going the same look to the wall, the concrete portion of the wall.
A quick question, when you're talking about the construction of that wall, just jumping to the engineer, one of the engineer's statements about how it would be constructed. There was some concern that you needed to do it in sections, or it would be, there would be the potential for, I don't know if there would be a you know, some sort of landslide potential back in the back there if you didn't do it in small sections.
I can explain that.
Yeah,
Brick House didn't receive that information yet. Tim Lannon, our village engineer, was not allowed or was not able to attend this evening. He reviewed the current wall plan that's before us, and one of the suggestions he mentioned was based on the geotechnical report recommendation of building the wall in 8-foot lengths so that there were no extended sections of the vertical slope opened up at one time.
oh, I didn't know these guys didn't have that.
Yeah, that,
Well, we actually provided that information to Tim.
Oh, you
So
did,
our geotechnical engineer has suggested that, and we're, you know,
but
obviously.
that's not
we're-
anything that you're unaware of, okay.
Nope.
I'm sorry, who was just speaking?
Sorry, Mike Scaletta with Brick House.
Oh, okay, thanks, Mike.
No problem.
I think that is about our presentation. Nothing else comes to mind for me. If maybe in talking to like more questions.
and Wade, did you want them to address the 2 building code issues now, or to do those separately as they're giving their presentation?
Just do them all now.
Okay, I can bring up the site plan and show those projections.
So is that rendering what the retaining wall looks like or potential? It
Yes.
grows.
Mhm. Yeah.
It doesn't look 6 feet high at the end, or is we
Well,
just not?
I can just say
Yeah, way
that
down
doesn't,
there. Yeah.
It is just down there. Here it becomes really low. It's
Right.
actually, I mean, it's a very small section that is 6 feet.
Okay.
I mean, it's maybe a fifth or even less than that from this 120 feet. I mean, I don't,
How many feet is,
if you go on the grading plan, Rob, I can walk you through this height.
yeah, I'm just curious.
So if you look the first number, so this is about 3.3 feet. Did I calculate it right? Yeah. And then it goes up to approximately 4 feet, and then approximately 5 feet. And then 1, 2, 3, 4.
If you look at these notes that say W and it has an elevation number, so
Mhm.
like the very end, it says 973, and then the ground is at 972. So it's real minimal there. As you get, yeah, Rob's
Mhm.
circling them.
So this is the one
difference
that's
between-
6.
Yep. As you, you know, if you calculate those, that's what that wall height is.
And then everything down below, it's less than 3 feet.
Okay.
I always have to ask, what would happen if you don't get the variance request that you're seeking?
We're in big trouble with the project. I mean, I don't know this. I really don't know, because that last building there will the last home there won't be able to be constructed because there won't be no access to that. And with that, I just don't know. I mean, the whole thing has to be redesigned, but at this point in time, I don't think the project has enough left in it to be redesigned, because the whole, I mean, the schematic design is done for the whole project. If we take it out,
Yeah,
it's just, we better not build it.
the
I mean,
last
just
building.
cover,
cannot be ro- the
just
last
cover
building
our
cannot-
losses, and that's it. I don't know.
The last building cannot be rotated. Rotated to the, so the front was facing more to the east.
I mean, that is something we need to address. I mean, I cannot really can say that with confidence.
Okay.
If it could be or it couldn't be, because it's a turning radius. It's the grading on the other side. It's the setbacks. It's the setback of the crest of the slope. It's just a lot of things that are tied up together.
Wait,
And the
it looks-
site and the floor plan that has now 3-car garage and first floor master. I'm just thinking. No, this doesn't have, yeah.
If I can reiterate again, this project's been looked at for, 2.5 years, and every single rendition has had this retaining wall on it. And in a varying locations and varying heights. At one point in time, it was supposed to be, about 14 foot tall, in roughly the same location within 2 foot. This we've adjusted what, our design as far as the civil engineering, and brought the grade up so we minimize the height of this wall as much as possible. But at no point in time has this wall been outside that 3 foot in the 2.5 years that this has been going through the city approvals. Not until the last planning commission was this brought up as we would be required a variance here. So Brickhouse is closed on this property, not realizing after 2.5 years of going through approval process that this was in violation of a new code. This is it's an essential part of this project and can't be constructed without it. After 2.5 years of everybody in the village looking at this, and the changes happening, it would be really disappointing if this didn't get approved. It would be a failure in everyone's part throughout the process going through this. It would be extreme disappointment to Brickhouse and to the village. I believe. I think this community is going to be a great community for the village, and hopefully redevelop a blighted area.
Mike, Alex, Jordan Burns here. Am I right that there's some questions relating to that last unit, the easternmost unit, but my assumption, looking at the drawing, the site plan, is that reconfiguring the site and the location of the retaining wall would likely impact that second to last unit as well, and maybe even the third unit because of the configuration of the drive. Am I right?
Yeah, I really don't see a way to readjust that and be able to give enough space for a garage, to be able to pull in a garage. You can see the width of the garage, and if you pull that wall in, an additional 6 foot, that you're left with very minimal amount. We might be able to do it with a no garage. But we would need a variance for that as well. And as far as marketability of of a nice home with no garage is, I don't think it's there.
What has stopped you guys from either trying to purchase a swath of the Miller's land or seeking the easement beforehand now that you know that this is a problem? Because it looks like those are pretty tight, getting in and out of those garages is going to be tight on the end there. I mean, giving you a couple more feet seems beneficial as cars get larger and longer. It seems like it's going to be really tight getting in there. And has there been, what stopped you guys from trying to seek that easement or even buying a portion of the property to enlarge it?
You mean seeking what easement? We understood about that we need this like 3 weeks ago.
Right. I mean, is there been a roadblock to seeking the easement or even potentially?
We've talked to the Millers, the neighbors, and that's in process regardless, as Dale said, we would be required in an easement for that.
To have
Mr. Miller, when did you first know that this property was going to require a retaining wall on the border of your property?
Well, we have known, I think, since the beginning, it was going to need a retaining wall. What we didn't know was the exact location of the retaining wall in terms of our property line. I have been in discussions with Andrew Brickman about the possibility of an easement since, well, I guess the last 6 weeks. So if you look at the topography there, you absolutely need a retaining wall. The question is the location of it. And if you grant this variance without the easement, I just think that's not the right approach. I think what is needed here is the Brickhouse partners need to acquire a little more land. It's not a lot, a little more land to make this project viable. And I'm
Mr.
willing
Miller,
to
that's Dale Marcos. So that we're clear, when you say you purchase a little more land, are you saying purchase an easement or an outright purchase of the land where they would take title to more land?
Well, either one. I mean, I haven't talked about the outright purchase with Andrew. We've just talked about an easement.
Because I assume the outright purchase of land could obviate the need for an easement then. Is that what you're thinking, Dale?
Yes.
Right.
Well, not only that, it would obviate the need for future maintenance easements, which they haven't seemed to come to agreement on either.
Right.
Well,
It wouldn't be a need for a
but-
variance either.
Right.
Was that Jim? Was that you?
Yeah, I was just saying if they bought the land, they wouldn't need a variance because it'd be well within, or
Well, that
most
would-
likely.
Here, respectfully, that would
but
frequently be true when a setback variance was being sought.
Sure.
That would solve the problem in most instances. Part of what, let me be blunt. There are two development issues at play here that I think are critical for the BZA. One is, as you've heard repeatedly, to be blunt, a timing issue. We are, as you've heard and as you've questioned, we are at the very end of the planning for this project, and have just within weeks been alerted to the variance, the need for a variance here, and that's put us in a bit of a box. Reconfiguring the development and the design of this wall to take advantage of an easement, or even if terms could be reached, a reconfiguration of the property through the purchase of property would, while it sounds like a simple solution, it's not. And for reasons that you on the BZA can anticipate. It would require a reconfiguration of the site plan. It would require a reconfiguration of the plat that's been presented before the city. It would be, I don't want to exaggerate, it would not be going back to square one. It would be going back to square two. and would really have a dramatic impact on the project and the developability, just from a timing perspective. The other thing that I want to be mindful of is that, you know, one of the Duncan factors is whether this is the bare minimum necessary in order to proceed with the project. And while sure, more space, the ability to build the wall on the other side of the property line could very well make the turning radiuses even better here. I don't think you're going to hear from the development team that there are any problems pulling cars in or out of this. But would more space be better? Almost always. But at the same time, then we would be here asking for potentially for a variance that would allow us to build on a neighbor's property. And at least in some communities, that would set off bells and whistles as well. So you know, we are at present constrained by the boundaries of this property, and constrained by your zoning code and your building code. And so that's why we're presenting a plan that keeps all of the development on this property. As you heard from Alex, would, if final terms with respect to an easement to allow for the construction of the wall, not the placement of the wall, but the construction of the wall with Mr. Miller, not be reached, then there's a way to build it without entering onto his property. That's not what we prefer. It doesn't sound like that's what anybody involved in this meeting prefers. And we're going to continue to work with Mr. Miller and try and reach an agreement that allows for that. But that shouldn't be confused with the variance that we're seeking here, which only goes to the location of the wall. And it's set back from the property line. So I don't want to, I certainly am not dismissing the concerns that have been raised about the wall and its proximity to the property line, or Mr. Miller's comments. They're good points, they're important points, but at the end of the day, the wall is proposed to be contained within the property, the brick house property. And that's the plan that's before you, and that's the plan that makes sense given where we are in the development process. As simple as that.
I have a quick
I'd like to
question.
respond to that, if
Go
I
ahead,
could,
Joe.
please.
All right, Mr. Miller.
I would just comment that there have been discussions about an easement for at least 6 to 8 weeks. So I would argue that perhaps they're trying to avoid the cost of an easement. I'm not arguing that the wall ought to be moved. The wall could stay right where it is. The question is disturbance of our property and building the wall. And even if you can build it without disturbing our property, at some point in the future, this wall will have to be maintained. And the likelihood is it will disturb our property.
What about the idea of doing this contingent upon the execution of construction and maintenance easements as part of the plan somehow?
That's certainly something that can be proposed, Lisa.
I mean, I don't know what the timing would need to, I mean, they would need to know that they could go forward, but they would also need to be committed to the easement process as well.
But it's Alex here. This might predispose, I mean, further discussions that we cannot, and requirements from us, in discussions between us, the neighbors, that we cannot meet. I mean, if that's contingent, I'm afraid that later on, how do you think the agreements are gonna be achieved and discussed? I'm just afraid we're gonna be put in a position where that's gonna be very difficult for us. And right now we can build this wall through our property. What type of maintenance that needs? Maybe Mike, if you can advise on this. I personally don't know, but can it be maintained from our property? And if
Mr.
you don't
Mike,
know, that's
yeah.
fine. I mean, we're not specialists in everything here, so.
I mean, it would be a replacement, so a tear out and replacement, or possibly cleaning out the lines, but all that, the drain lines in the back, which we'd have a clean out at the one end and possibly a couple along the way, which would be on the River House property. So those maintenance items are something that can be done. As far as a replacement, tear out and replacement in the future, when that's required, it would be the same process as when we
Constructing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it might not be fair to us to be put in such situation.
Okay. I apologize. We've in creating a full record here, we've jumped around. So I just want to make sure, Brick House Partners, have you had a chance to say everything that you wanted to say? I know, Alex, we interrupted you several times. Is there anything else from any of you, Jordan, that you haven't said as part of your presentation before I throw it over to the board for further questions?
I don't think so, unless Alex or Mike, you want to speak to the other variances here, the location of the structure in proximity to the lot lines. If you have anything to add on that to
I
what I
think
had
you
previously.
presented those. I don't have anything else to say. These are pretty clear where they come from. It was again something that came up a little later and is based on the requirement of the Planning Commission for the 0 lot lines. So I don't have what to add there unless there are any questions. I think you explained it and Rob explained it.
Okay, does the board have any questions on those issues on the other side of the property?
I mean, those are essentially the same, that would be essentially the same discussion that we had at our last meeting. We're just looking at the building code instead of the zoning code.
Correct.
Is
That's
that
my
right?
thought, Lisa. Yeah.
Right. So for the same reason, I mean, it would be virtually the same set of, arguments.
Yeah, unless I'm missing something, I think the facts are the same, so.
Right.
Anybody else, Brick House Property Partners, anything else that you'd like to say before I throw it to the board for question and then back to the public?
No, thank you.
No, I'm good too. Thank you.
Okay, board questions. We've jumped around a fair amount. I think we've all blurted out a variety of questions, but any further questions from the board? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Christy, can you check with anybody who's participating? I know we've had, obviously, Mr. Miller. Is there anybody else listening who would like to participate?
I have Larry, Nancy, and Susan. If either of you would like to comment, please use the raise your hand function in the Zoom platform to let me know. No response, Wade.
All right, going once, going twice. Any final thought, questions? No?
No, sir.
Okay,
So later, I was going to ask if we could have Rob discuss the Tim Lannon's input since he's not here. And I think we were going to have Rob walk through that for us. Our engineer's input on this, the issue of the retaining wall.
Sure, I can do that. Okay, Tim had some notes he wanted me to share, which I just shared recently with the board. His comments, he stated regarding the wall setback variance. All he can say is that there's a reason we wrote the ordinance the way we did. To build, maintain, and eventually replace a wall, it makes sense to have access to the top and bottom. An easement would provide the same benefit as a setback, as though it is conceptual at this time. He says regarding slope stability, rock was found by borings at about the 6 foot deep level in the vicinity of the wall, so this is not a huge slope concern, mostly constructability. The geotechnical report, as Michael said, they submitted, recommend building an 8-foot length so that no extended sections of the vertical slope are opened up at one time. And that's his comments on the retaining wall.
So when he says mostly constructability, is he just referencing the ability to construct it relative to where it's located? In terms
Correct.
of being on the lot line? Is that what he's referencing
That
there?
would be my interpretation.
Again, he's not here, so we can't really ask
Right.
him.
But that is, I mean, constructability is how you build it in the place that you want to build it. So
Yeah, okay.
we're not looking at the stability underneath it. We're not looking at how stable it is behind it. We're looking at how you actually build it in place.
And
And
obviously,
was-
Rob, if a wall is to be built, the engineer is involved throughout that process.
That's correct. Nothing's constructed without full approval of the engineer and the village.
Even with a variance granted.
That's correct.
Okay, what I would propose is we take two separate issues here and perhaps a motion as to the I guess it's 133901 and 02, what I would call the north side of the property. Why don't we take a motion on that, and then we'll take a separate motion on the retaining wall, if that makes sense.
Okay, I'll do the building code motion
All right, Lisa, thank you.
and explain the affirmative.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, yes. To those who haven't been through one of these, we'll make a motion in the affirmative, and then the board members will each vote yes or no on that motion. So don't think because the motion is read as in favor of, that means this is passed yet. There'll still be a vote aye or nay on the affirmative motion.
Okay. So I would move that we approve the request for a variance to building code sections 1339.01, structure within 3 feet of a line, and building code section 1339.02, projection near lot line. These building code variances are essentially identical to the variances that we granted with respect to that were requested by the applicant at our last meeting relative to the fact that these structures are built essentially on the lot line, so that with zero lot line, with being built right on the lot line, by definition, all of the balconies and cornices and anything that projects beyond the edge of that structure will be in closer than 3 feet to a lot line. And so the discussion that we have with respect to the reasons for allowing that to happen based on the unique character of the property and the design of the buildings and the desire to keep this project in consideration for the environment of that area and the vegetation and the sensitivity of the river bank. We thought that was appropriate. So therefore, now that we have the authority to, as a board, to grant variances with respect to the building code, it's appropriate that we allow these two variance requests to go forward based on the discussion that we had last time and the similar sections of the zoning code.
Thank you. Lisa, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Who seconded that?
Rachel seconds.
Rachel, okay. Rob, roll call, please. Rob, you're muted.
Rocky,
I vote aye for the reasons stated.
Freshman Johnson,
Aye.
Frick,
Aye for all the reasons in the motion.
Holdren,
Aye for all the reasons in this motion and the last one from last month. It was exactly the same. Aye.
Okay, go ahead. And Kramer.
I vote aye.
Okay, so those, that motion obviously passed 5-0. What that means then is that will go, council has 15 days to appeal that decision. If it's not appealed in 15 days, 3 members of council have to do that. If it's not appealed, then that motion will pass and you will have that variance to the building codes, our very first one ever. So now we're up to the retaining wall issue. Is there someone who wants to make a motion on this one?
I can do it.
Rachel, good, thank you.
Okay, so I can do this motion in one of 2 ways. I already thought about making the motion contingent. And we can vote on that. If it fails, can we make a motion that's not contingent? Or should or we could do it the reverse. And this is really a question for Dale. There's some debate on whether or not we should be requiring, because of the access is one thing to build the wall and the disturbance that inevitably may happen. It's more of protecting the long-term issues of maintenance in the village. The Millers may be long gone and the developer may be long gone. They could sell the property, they can abandon. We don't know what the future holds. And the reality of whoever owns these 2 properties, if there's no easement in place for maintenance and of the retaining wall, it causes the city potential complications in the future, putting us at risk. So the question truly is, they clearly need a retaining wall to build. It's the slope. We understand where this is. Once again, we face the issue of we can't do the project without the variances, and the developer has pushed us greatly to try to build very large product because they want the financial model to work at the level they want it to work at based on the cost of what they purchased this land for. So, you know, all of these issues are not alleviated. So my question to Dale is, should we make the motion contingent, or should we not do it if it doesn't pass without the you know, if I have no idea what people are voting, we don't talk about this beforehand. If the motion doesn't pass as regular, can we do a motion to pass with a contingent of an easement in place to protect the village future risk?
It was a long question, but the answer is you can make the motion with the contingency as your first motion, or you could decide to make the motion without a contingency. You also have a couple other options. You have the option to continue the matter and require the parties to see if they can reach an easement and then come back to you. Or you could make a motion to deny the variance outright. So you have, from what I can think of, you have at least those 4 options.
Dale,
But
do we have the ability to set a time frame? For instance, if we were thinking of continuing, could we give the parties, you know, a month, 30 days, or 15 days? Do we have the ability to set a timing contingency on those discussions?
Sure. You can do that.
And if the motion, and separately then, if we were to make a motion to approve the variance as requested and it was denied, do we then have the ability to say, okay, well, what about approving the motion with an easement? Or is it a one vote for the request, and then we're stopped from bringing another separate motion?
No, as long as you haven't adjourned, and actually there's a case that says even before you've approved your minutes at the next meeting, you could reverse yourself or you could modify it. So if you wanted to make a straight out motion to approve with no contingencies and that failed, then you could still do a motion tonight to approve contingent upon the easement. If whoever's making the motion believes that what they want to see happen is that it get approved with a contingency for an easement, then I would recommend that that motion be initiated on that basis.
I personally, and again, Rachel, it's your motion. I personally would like to see a continuance with a very specific time frame. We move this meeting up early, you know, whether it's 15 days or whatever the case might be, but I would consider asking for a continuance to see if the parties can work something out.
I agree with Wade. I'd like to see a continuance, and even if we had to hold a meeting in the short term, once they've come to an agreement.
Yeah, I have no problem. I don't know about the rest of the board. I have no problem rescheduling another meeting in 2 weeks if we have to. We've already had the evidence presented to us. But I personally think that neighbors working things out is always the best way if possible.
Well, do keep in mind, we have the notice requirement for a meeting. So if we,
That's how long?
well, it's a 15-day notice requirement, but I have to be able to say in the notice what the matter is before the board. So I need to know for sure if an agreement's been worked out or not, so I can state that, or I can say we're moving forward with it. I don't want to blindly notice a meeting and then have it not happen because we don't have that. Or what do you think on that, Dale?
No, Rob, if we're continuing it to give them a chance to work it out and we're scheduling a new date now, you don't have to give a notice about if they're going to approve agreement between. The one thing I want to alert everybody, and this is something Jordan Burns mentioned, even if they do an easement, they still have to ultimately get a legal description, and a surveyor's got to do that. So that's going to take a little bit of time. So if they come to terms, you couldn't expect a final signed agreement with a legal description attached to be done in 2 weeks. It probably will take, somewhat longer than that. But if they've agreed on all the essential terms and they just are waiting for the easement, that would be reasonable to expect, whether it's a purchase or an easement. And I would point out also that whether it's a purchase or an easement, the wall would not have to move. But I would agree with Jordan Burns that if it's going to be a purchase, then they're going to have to revise their plat, which is going to require, again, a survey, and it's going to take more time for them to do that. So there are logistical issues with a purchase versus an easement. If they do an easement, they don't have to change the plat.
Thanks, Dale. This is Jordan again. If I could chime in just so that everybody is clear. And while technology is good, it doesn't allow me to communicate with my client as promptly as I might like as we're in the midst of this discussion. But I want to be clear that the easement that we're contemplating as a possibility would be essentially a work easement. We wouldn't be relocating the wall, and we wouldn't be reconfiguring the property, again, for the reasons I mentioned earlier. It would really be to allow us to perform work on the Miller property if we needed to for construction or repair. And that's why I don't want to belabor the point, but that's why I was saying earlier that the variance that's being sought here is in a sense independent of that, and you'll decide what you will in terms of whether to take a vote and what to vote on tonight. But I want to be clear: if you were to grant the variance that we requested on its terms, without conditioning it on our obtaining an easement to work on the Miller's property, then we have the ability to build the wall. If we can't build the wall, because we can't, contrary to what you've heard tonight, we can't do it without entering onto the Miller's property, that's our problem. If we manage to build the wall exclusively on our property and there's maintenance that needs to be performed on the Miller property, despite what you've heard from us tonight, that's our problem. And at that point, we've got to figure out what to do in order to perform that work. And that's why I said earlier, and why I'm repeating now, the request for the variance really is independent of how we resolve those issues. So I don't want to confuse the two issues. We may very well, whether it's because you continue this meeting for a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is, be able to reach an agreement with the Millers that allows for that work. We may not be able to. We may need more time for the reasons that Dale described, or or whatever the reasons may be. But regardless, the variance that we're going to seek is going to be the same variance.
So Jordan, then what you're saying is you don't see any possibility that you would purchase, I'm making up a number, but a 10-foot piece of property that would allow you to move the retaining wall further out and outside of 3 feet, you wouldn't need a variance. You don't see that as a possibility?
Unless,
I don't think we want to entertain this, and it is, again, so as far as timing, I don't think it's fair to us to be put in a position where we must do it. I mean, that's how it looks like. And when it comes to this, agreements about purchasing something like that become out of the ordinary market, which I don't think it's fair to be done after we have done our due diligence on the property that we are purchasing last year and took a development decision to purchase it in September of last year, not knowing that this is what we're going to face a year later. And in addition to what Jordan just said, last Thursday, knowing that in preparation for this meeting, Andrew reached out to Joe Miller and discussed the construction easement. And Andrew told me that they had agreement that we're going to be provided this construction easement. Until then, I mean, from then until now, there were 2 business days to prepare all the documentation. But that's what Andrew told me, that they had phone discussion that we are going to be provided that access.
In that case, I'd be willing to grant a variance based on construction and maintenance easement.
Right.
Yeah,
If you think it's almost a done deal, then it shouldn't be a problem.
Because I would rather do that and then delaying this, and then Brick House partners can weigh the price. I mean, it all comes down to money, to whether you want to pay for an easement or make the 6th house smaller. I don't really think that's a good option, though. But
well, yeah, thanks for mentioning this. I don't know how to address this, but yeah, you're right. It comes down to money. And when this is contingent, this becomes more. And that's not where I think it's fair to us to be put in a situation. And then you all understand that.
Yeah, and I think we all, I guess I don't know, I can't speak for everybody else. I mean, when I looked at this property, I knew it was going to have a retention wall, and I knew it was going to be as close to the property as possible. But what I'm worried about is, I know you can build it without touching their property, but in 15 years, 20 years, you need to redo it. It's going to be left up to, I don't even think that's general for the whole condo or whatever it's called, the whole homeowners association. That's actually going to be just like the 4th, 5th, and 6th unit. It looks like it's going to be just their responsibility to now tear down that wall and rebuild it. And
now, in the unlikely event, and I think it really is an unlikely event that that type of maintenance were necessary. The wall is part of, and this goes back to the wisdom of the Planning Commission. The wall is part of the common area, so it will be the homeowners association's responsibility to maintain it. So again, I don't want to belittle the concern, because it's a legitimate one, obviously. If you were to grant the variance we are seeking without a contingency, we would continue to work with the Millers to obtain it. It is easier. You're hearing us say it is easier to build this with the work easement than without it. It isn't essential, and we certainly can't say that it's essential, because again, just being blunt, it changes the bargaining position here. And frankly, even if Mr. Miller were to agree that there is an agreement in principle with respect to a work easement during this meeting, the lawyers who are involved in this will all say, well, that's an interest in property that probably can't be held to. Mr. Miller can't be held to that until it's in a writing, an authenticated writing. So I don't want to put the BZA, embroil the BZA in that kind of controversy, and I don't want to embroil Mr. Miller in that kind of controversy. What you're hearing is that we really are genuinely endeavoring to work out the details of that easement. It won't be finalized for the reasons that Dale mentioned in a week or in 2 weeks as a practical matter, not for lack of effort, but just as a practical matter. So the question really is whether this board is willing to allow the construction of the wall in the location shown in the plans and leave it to us to continue our discussions with the Millers and hopefully finalize an easement so that we can build it easier and quicker, and hopefully ultimately less costly than it would be to build it solely from our property. But either way, it's going to be in the same location. So that's the location is the issue before the BZA. But I understand the comments that have been made that the location is dictated by the code in part because of constructability and because of maintenance. And here we are doing what we can to reach an agreement in a very short time frame, whether it's 2 weeks or 6 weeks. That's a short time frame to be dealing with this, given where we are in the scope of this project. And I'm sorry to make that the BZA's problem, but it's September, and the construction season in Northeast Ohio ends soon, and that means that if we don't get this resolved within days, within a couple of weeks, given the 15-day appeal period that the council has here, we are at real risk of losing the ability to commence construction this construction season, which really does put the project at risk. The BZA can say not our problem. That's you have that discretion, but that's the reality. That's where we are in this, and please understand, it's not through lack of effort on our part to move this along. It's not through lack of candor with the administration or this board. We have been before you repeatedly to address every issue that's come up, and we've been open and honest with you and with the administration as these issues have come up. It's just unfortunate that the calendar is falling the way it is now with this, but that's where we are.
Mr. Chairman, there's one question that you probably have on your minds. If you do the motion tonight to approve contingent on the easement, and if the parties cannot reach an agreement on the easement, that would not preclude Brickhouse from coming back to you and saying, could you please modify the approval? And here's why we were reasonable and Mr. Miller was not. And here's why we can still do this without his easement. And you could modify that approval or that conditional approval. So Jordan talks about leverage, and I understand where he's coming from, and I agree that that's something that ordinarily somebody would think to have, but ultimately it could come back to you to unlever that should there be one side or the other being unreasonable.
That's helpful, Dale. Thank you.
And I would say, whether was 6 weeks or 3 weeks or 3 days, you did have some time to come up with have the conversation and make an offer or come to some sort of, kind of temporary agreement and say that, hey, we're pretty close to an agreement. We just haven't drawn up the paperwork, but it doesn't really seem like that kind of happens. So for you guys to say that you've put forth as much effort as you possibly can, I don't necessarily think that's true.
I understand the comment. We are trying to reach an agreement with Mr. Miller. I'm not directly involved in those communications, but I trust from what Alex has described during this that it's not for lack of effort that it's not finalized, really.
Let me say
on anybody's part.
Okay. Yeah, we have a planning commission meeting next Monday night, and that is hopefully, well, we thought it was going to be the last meeting needed, with the idea that Brickhouse would be able to get started. They have approval for doing foundation work from the planning commission already. It took a long time to get their plans reviewed and back and comments, and then this issue about the wall came up. So they are at a point where the end of the construction season is going to be upon them soon. So we're doing everything we can administratively to try and move that along for them. And if you were to give contingent approval tonight and they had to come back, if you set a meeting now, you'd still be in, you know, at best early October before this could be heard again.
Why do you say at best early October, Dale? Just because of the 15-day the notice requirement,
Right.
which is, again, tell me, I should know, Rob. How many days notice do we have to give neighbors?
15 days.
15.
15 days.
Dale, is there anything else we can do? I guess, you know, if we don't want to hold this project up, but we're just concerned, I don't know, I'm not sure how to word this. But like, you know, if right now they're saying they want to work out a deal because they can make a wall that's easier. And it'd probably be a better wall. If you can access it from both sides, I'm sure you can excavate down easier. It might be a better wall. But if we grant this without the contingency, they can go in and just throw up a wall. It might be a little bit cheaper in the long run. And I guess what's protecting us from making sure it's a good wall?
Your engineer.
Yeah.
That's what I was.
Who
Guilty.
has been very diligent with respect to all design aspects on this project. I think Dale and Rob can confirm.
Yes, that's correct.
We are not getting cut any breaks. There are no
Dale,
corners being cut.
If we just take a straight motion to grant the variance requested right now, we vote yay or nay, we vote no. Let's say the majority vote no. That does not preclude, that would not preclude Brick House from continuing negotiations with, I mean, if it's yes, then they have 15 days to wait for council. And if it's no, they could still go to Mr. Miller, try and negotiate. Could they come back with a variance in hand or with something with an easement in hand and try again?
They could come back to you and before you've approved the minutes at your next meeting.
Okay.
They could come back to you and say, we've worked out an easement. Can you modify or revert? Basically, you're reversing
Reverse.
yourselves. Yeah,
Right.
or make a new motion. But essentially, you'd be reversing your other decision of denial and approving it based on the fact that they have the easement.
Right. I mean, I would be inclined, given all we've talked about, it's what the applicant wants to vote on their application, which is a request for a variance. And we vote aye or nay. If we vote aye, then it passes and they're done, absent council activity. And if we vote no, then you know they still have options, I guess. They have less leverage, but I mean they made their presentation. It was a thoughtful, thorough presentation. They want us to vote aye or nay. I'd say we vote aye or nay and go from there.
Can I ask a question? Mr. Burns, is it beyond what you can say to say that you think that the parties and that Brick House and Mr. Miller have could you say you have an agreement in principle, or you can't say that at this
Yeah,
time?
my understanding coming into this meeting was that there was an agreement in principle to allow for the work to be performed on the Miller property.
And it was a matter of working out the specifics and the details.
Yes.
Can Mr. Miller corroborate that?
Yeah.
He does not appear to be with us.
He's still listed as an attendee, but he's no longer a panelist.
I can promote him to a panelist.
Yeah,
Would you like Mr. Miller promoted to a panelist?
yeah.
Good.
Whatever that means.
The big
Means
promotion.
He can't
It
vote,
means-
right?
Means he could talk.
Yeah, okay.
I'm gonna let him in.
You're muted, Mr. Miller.
Christie, do you need to unmute him or he?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So Mr. Miller, it was just, we've done a lot of talking. I assume you've been listening. It was just represented to us that Mr. Burns felt, from his understanding, that there was agreement in principle with you. And we just wanted to get your view of that.
The discussion we had did not share with me the details of how close the wall was going to be to the property line and the variance required. There was no agreement in principle. We've had discussions about the variance 10 days ago. Sorry, not the variance, the easement 10 days ago, but there's been little discussion since. I'm confident that Andrew and I can come to some agreement on an easement, which I think would make sense.
So not quite there, but almost there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
But you discussed, it's Alex here, you have talked on the phone last Thursday, right? With Andrew.
I
This
had a
just-
telephone conversation with Andrew on Thursday, yes.
Yeah, because he mentioned to me that you're in agreement to allow us
He
to
was,
provide us with the
you know,
construction with the construction easement.
and we talked about the need for this meeting, and there were no details discussed in terms of how close the wall was to the property line.
Mr. Miller, is the discussions that you had just during construction of the initial wall, or did it include future maintenance and replacement?
No, did not include maintenance and replacement. That's really a concern, is the maintenance and replacement.
And you don't feel that you have some understanding of how that, of what that would look like if you agreed to allow them on the site for construction, that there would be a similar kind of situation when there needed to be repair?
It'd be a similar disruption for maintenance.
Right.
You know, given this wall is a half foot from the property line, I believe, that to me is not a good precedent.
So you weren't aware of that coming into this meeting?
No.
Well, I think this was discussed before, where the wall was, but
well, again, I would ask or propose to the board, we vote at the applicant's request, we vote aye or nay on the application before us. And that leaves still choices and options for the parties, whatever we vote, aye or nay.
Okay, I'll make a motion. I'd like to make a motion regarding the property located at 180 Cleveland Street in regards to section 1148.07C retaining walls. All retaining walls must be within 3 feet of the property line, and then an additional foot for every foot of height added to that retaining wall beyond an additional, I don't know exactly what the additional foot requirement is, but I know there's an additional foot required.
1 foot for every 3 foot.
Say again, Rob.
It's 1 foot for every foot above 3 foot in wall.
Right, 3 foot the wall. Okay, sorry. So must be within 3 feet, at least 3 feet from the property line, and then an additional foot for every foot above the 3 foot height of the retaining wall. The retaining wall of this property is on the south border of the property, and the way that it's designed at this point in time, it sits directly on the property border, and it runs 125 feet along the south border. The height varies from 1.4 to 6 feet. So as the wall gets higher, the variance gets greater. The property cannot be built without this retaining wall. So can the property yield a reasonable return? It can the property can be built, but it would have to adjust its reasonable return. Clearly, the developer has presented a financial model without any numbers, but saying that by adjusting sizes of condos or houses here, or minimizing parking areas, shifting the property is not a possibility because of the other lot line variances that have been already granted, to an extent that any further push along to the riverbed would be significant. So the developer has maintained that obviating this, there is no other way. So they cannot move it. It absolutely needs a retaining wall. Village engineer has opined on that. And the only complication is how to build a retaining wall and how to maintain a retaining wall that sits on the lot line of the property. The variance is perhaps not substantial in numbers per se, as we normally are talking about percentages, but it may be deemed substantial as far as setting precedents for retaining walls that don't meet requirements. The essential character of the neighborhood would be significantly altered if potentially there is no way to maintain this wall due to the ability to get to the retaining wall in future years on a property that is not owned by the developer. But as far as the look and feel, it would not impact the substantiality of the neighborhood because it fits into the design and architecture and is only seen from the north and west side of the property. It would not adversely affect governmental services, as the retaining wall location is allowing them actually to access the back of the property. So it's helping that. The property owner purchased the property knowing there would be a retaining wall, but not understanding the details of the retaining wall not being allowed to be on the property line. And for note, this was found late by the village, and so this discussion has been unfortunately delayed, which is a detriment to the developer making progress. The owner has not been able to obviate this predicament as discussed earlier in the motion of all different ways to realign. The only option at this point for them would be to purchase more land or to decrease the size of some of the units to allow for the retaining wall to be moved. And that would substantially impact the financial model and capabilities of the whole project in total. And the spirit and intent behind the zoning would be observed by granting this variance to allow the developer to come in and build this property. The circumstances were self-created by buying this lot the way that it lands and trying to make the product as they are designing here, but they are working within the boundaries of this lot to try to make a product work within the financial boundaries of an overall development project. And that concludes the motion.
Hey, before I ask for a second, Dale, can I seek one more bit of evidence?
Sure.
Sorry, Mr. Miller, approximately how far is your house from the area we're discussing right now?
It's probably 200 feet.
Okay. All right, thank you. I just wanted to make sure we had that on the record as well. Is there a second to Rachel's motion?
Second.
Thank you, Lisa. Rob, we're ready for roll.
Okay. Freshman Johnson.
I vote no. I feel that this property has been changed and varianced and planning and zoning and changed and favors and of explaining, and at the end of the day, you brought this property, you knew the size it was, and you got to develop a product that fits within this property. The property across the way is for sale. There's lots of other options that you can do. I understand there's a financial model here, but I just think that we keep continuing to cut away variance exceptions, do it And it just seems to me like we're getting to the point where it doesn't work unless you have different kind of setup here. So I'm voting no.
Frick,
I share the frustration of everyone on this call. This has been a project long in the making, and I think everyone within the village, every village official has touched upon this project. The Brick House team has touched upon the project. I mean, it's been a long time in the making. To some degree, the project's been led by planning and zoning, and they've taken some things out of our hands. I view this somewhat differently. I think that the request is substantial, but I don't see how else they can build the project other than where that wall needs to be. I would have hoped that good neighbors would have worked this out themselves, and I still think that needs to happen. I wouldn't legislate it though. I would vote aye, but I would note that as Jordan said, and what I was thinking throughout, it's their problem. It's Brick House's problem. And if they don't reach agreement with the neighbor, that's going to be on Brick House. And if they damage his property or do whatever, that's going to be on the Brick House team. I also find compelling, it's a beautiful property. Mr. Miller's house, I don't think is at risk. His own personal place, but I think that we've granted, and I'm frustrated as we all are in all the various iterations of this project. But to me, to go this far and not say you can't build the wall, I wouldn't go that far. So I would say aye, but I would caution and I would hope that the parties work out something, because as counsel for the applicant said, if something happens and they don't have an agreement, it's on them. So I would vote aye.
Holdren.
I definitely felt a lot more comfortable voting aye if this was contingent on an agreement, but I understand why that can't be. I am going to vote aye also. I feel like the developers are going to find out it's better to work on a construction and maintenance agreement with the Millers as opposed to trying to build the wall from one side. But I feel like Wade just stated, this is up to them, to decide what's best for their property. So, but I will grant variance, or I will vote aye for the variance to build the wall on the as designed.
Kramer.
This one's very tough. I guess what bothers me is that this project was so far along before the code changed, and then it was so far along before anybody on the project was made aware that there were variance requests. And the BZA has been squeezed and shoehorned into adding authority so that we can vote on something and doing that. But having said that, I feel like if we don't grant the variance, I wish that it wasn't a matter of giving leverage to one party or another by granting a variance or making a variance contingent. And I agree with Jim that it would be much better to grant this with contingency on an agreement being reached. But I think on balance, I guess I'm going to vote aye with great reservation, and also with real strong encouragement to Brick House that they've got to include the neighbor in making some sort of agreement here that allows this to go forward and not have it be something where, they're being resented on all sides by making something that makes neighbors unhappy and creates a negative feeling from the neighbors around them. So with a lot of hesitation, I'll vote aye.
And Rocky.
So I see four major factors when it comes to this. First off, the property will have, financial value without the variance as it stands. This is a a substantial variance. We're basically allowing you to take 6 feet of somebody else's property without really getting their permission if we grant this variance. Is it, you guys create, this is a self-created problem. You could shrink the pieces of the housing and yeah, you wouldn't make as much money, but you could do it without the variance. And I don't think that we're doing justice to the zoning code by granting this, right? This is a new zoning code. We're setting precedent saying that, yeah, you know, well, when it comes to walls, we'll just kind of let you do whatever you want. And for all those reasons, I'm going to vote no.
All right, so what that means is we have 3 by 3 to 2 vote, the motion has passed. And as we have seen multiple times in the past, council has utilized its ability to appeal. So what that means is if 3 members of council choose to take this before council, then our decision will be appealed and would be considered. When is the next council meeting?
I believe it's going to be October 12th. There's talk that we will not have one on September 28th.
Okay, so
That hasn't been decided yet, but that's just the talk.
so if 3 members of council petition to hear this before council, that might push this off until October 12th. If that does not happen and 15 days comes and goes, then your variance request has been granted and you can proceed. But again, you've got to wait 15 days and you will obviously hear from Rob if and when there's an appeal granted or taken or not. So basically, you'll wait for 15 days to see what's next, but you have passed through 3 to 2 through BZA.
Wade, can I say something also? This
Yeah,
is
please.
for both parties. Because this was a 3 to 2 vote, and one of the votes no is a councilman, there is a likelihood that there may be a petition process to bring this before council. So if the parties can reach an easement agreement, hopefully they can do that quickly, because that may obviate the petition getting filed if we can learn that they've reached an agreement on an easement for construction as well as future maintenance.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Dale. So as I think all 5 of us expressed, neighborly agreement would be best. We view it differently how you get there, but I think all of us have said loudly and clearly, hopefully the parties can reach some kind of agreement and move forward.
We hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else to come before BZA? I think that's the only item on the agenda, but do we have anything else?
Wait, can I just, after you adjourn, can I speak to all of BZA for a brief moment? Just me and the board.
Sure. Do you want Christie to make sure that we're just alone at that point?
Yes, after the meeting adjourns.
Okay, so we, I believe I've heard nothing else, nothing else before us, so we are adjourned. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate your thoughts, your comments, your passion on this stuff, so thank you. And then we'll wait for Christie to clear off everyone other than the board, and we'll see what Rob has to say.
And
Thank
Dale.
you. Good night, all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
And the Indians are still winning, so I have my Salt River field up.
Are we killing them 1-0?
2-1, but they have
Oh.
men on, they have men on
I was
first and
gonna say, I
second.
thought they were losing 1-0, but I guess they came back.
Oh, we just got out of that inning. Okay, so it's 2-1, end of the 4th.
Who's pitching for us?
Carrasco.
Yeah, the season's over in a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, Kipnis just flied out with men on first and second. And Lindor got thrown out at home with an incredible throw from right field.
Oh.
It was amazing. Yeah, they'll show that on the highlights tomorrow.
We thought you were reviewing the code when you were looking away.
Yeah, actually, I just turned it on a minute ago. I forgot I'm in my office.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
like a rock.
Okay.
No, what was happening, I get little flashes that come on my iPad whenever there's a score by either team. But I turned the TV on about a minute ago and saw that